So I made this video with advice for composers, and after that video came out, I had a couple of requests for a video on how to cold email performers, which I thought is a great idea. And so here's the video. I wanted to collect some opinions and ideas from other colleagues who are professional new music players. So I had a few kind of informal chats with people, but I also made a little survey to ask them a bunch of questions about how they feel about it and what they think best practice would be. So I'm going to share a lot of that information with you. I think the survey results are really interesting because not all performers have the same opinions. But they did make me feel like a lot of the existing opinions that I have about this are justified. I hope you find this useful. Please like and subscribe, and let's get into the video. Hi, sorry to interrupt. I was doing the editing for this video and I realized I forgot a few things that I really wanted to say. So I'm just going to kind of pop in here periodically during this video. The first thing I just wanted to say is I'm going to say things like send your best clarinet piece, and obviously I mean send whatever, insert name of instrument here, piece you need to send to that particular performer. It's just because I'm a clarinettist, so it's a little bit from my perspective. In fact, the whole video is going to be a mix of things from my perspective and things from the survey's perspective. So I hope that's kind of clear while you're going through the video. Okay, I'll be back. Right, I'm just going to have my notes here with me just so that I get the stats right on the results from the survey. I think the first thing to say is that nobody is sending these emails as much as you would think. So most of the people who responded to my survey said that they only get emails like this a couple of times a year. I maybe get on average 10 to 15 of these a year, and that's it. So it's not a huge amount of emailing like this that's going on. But additionally, most people aren't adding that much music from cold call emails to their repertoire. I don't think this is going to surprise you. 87% of respondents to the survey said that they've added new pieces to their repertoire from cold call emails a couple of times. And that's true for me as well. It hasn't happened that often, but when it has happened, it's often been things that I've played multiple times and really loved. Honestly, I think it's also really important that you don't underestimate what a commitment it is for a player to take on new repertoire, particularly if it's solo repertoire. I probably only actually learn a handful of new solo pieces every year. And I just thought I'd be really specific about what solo pieces I'm sorry, it's so noisy outside. We're having scaffolding put up and I really hope that I get this finished before like a man appears in this window, because that is going to happen at some point today. Anyway, in my own repertoire last year, there were only 4 solo pieces that I learned to play in concert. And that was one by Rob Phillips, one by Jesse Bruckmann, one by Christophe Bertrand, and one by Jörg Frey. And I think only like 2 of those did I really feel like I chose to play them. I also had a bunch of solo pieces that I learned for student workshops. And I think this year is pretty similar. 2 solo pieces that I'm learning at the minute are things that I didn't choose to play. I was booked by other people to play them. I'm happy to learn to play them anyway, just in case you're one of those 2 composers. They're great pieces. And there are kind of 2 like commissioned pieces that I'm working on, but that's sort of it for the year. And I think, like, I've never really thought about this before, but I think that's pretty standard for me anyway. It's going to be different for everybody. I mean, people who do more solo stuff are going to have much higher numbers than me. At any rate, it's just a big deal to take on something new, and I don't think you need a million players to take on your work. You just need a couple of people to engage with it to make all of the difference to how your work is developing and how your career is developing. That said, we're all in new music because we love working on new pieces and we love collaborating with composers, and I'm going to use collaboration a lot in this video because I think I really want to focus on trying to have a super collaborative approach when you send these emails. Most of the people who answered my survey also made reference to this. Forming long-term collaborations should be the greatest pleasure of your career. It certainly is of mine. Obviously, I already talked about this a lot in my Advice for Composers video, and if you haven't watched that already, I'll post a link to that one below. You will notice, or you may have already noticed, that most of the emails that you send like this don't get a response. 42% of the people who responded to my survey said that if they don't respond to a composer email, it's because they don't have the time. And there's nothing that you can do about this. I think it's just worth trying to be a little understanding about the time pressure that freelance performers are under, and probably most of the performers that you're going to be writing to if your scores are going to be freelancers. Just very quickly, when I say time pressure, I also obviously mean financial pressure. When we're answering these emails, this is kind of unpaid labor. So just do keep that in mind. If I don't respond to an email, it's usually forgetfulness. My email inbox has got out of control. You've kind of gone to the bottom, or I've accidentally archived the email without responding to it. Or by the time I get to it, I feel like so long has passed that it just feels a little bit embarrassing to respond to it now. I fully recognize that none of these are reasonable reasons to have not responded to an email, but I'm just trying to be honest about what can happen. 42% of people who responded to this question also said that if they don't respond, it's because a composer is too pushy. So either composers don't have time or you're too pushy. Those are the main reasons people aren't responding. And we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to not come across too pushy later in this video. But I think it's worth keeping in mind that the reason people aren't responding is generally not because they don't like the piece. It's a time pressure thing or a pushiness issue. For what it's worth, for performers, I do have a little tip which I stole from another colleague of mine in terms of making sure that composers do at least get a response to these emails. I basically use email signatures in Google to tee up automatic responses to things. And so I have one that I use anytime that I get that first cold call email from a composer, which basically says, hey, thanks for sending me your piece. I'm often really busy and can't respond to individual emails properly, but I archive everything people send me and usually find a couple of times a year to go through things. Then at least generally everybody gets some kind of response. In terms of sending follow-up emails once you sent that first one, I was really amazed at how different everyone's opinions were on this. Quite a few people suggested you should send a follow-up email a week later, which I would hate because sometimes it takes me a week just to have read through all of my emails. Like, that's a normal amount of catch-up time for me. So unless your follow-up email a week later is saying, by the way, I found this amazing, well-paid gig for you to play my piece in, I think a week is too soon. But not everybody did. But actually very few people said you should never send a follow-up email. So maybe it's worth doing, but I would honestly leave it a month. And that follow-up email should not put any pressure on the performer to respond. I think that's really important. And I'm going to talk about like not putting pressure on to respond later, but just to say follow-up emails shouldn't have any pressure to respond. I had an email the other day that actually started with the phrase, no agenda here, but, and actually that just like took loads of the pressure off. In fact, it took loads of the pressure off from responding. I haven't responded to that yet. I'm sorry to you. I will respond to you today. Right, so now onto that first email that you send. What do you put in it? I think the most important thing is that you keep it super short. The most important things to put in it are a link to your website, a link to the score, and a link to the recording. It's safest to just include links to things rather than cluttering up people's emails with big files. When you're sending links, don't use something that expires like WeTransfer. Use something like Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever, somewhere where you can keep your pieces up for the long term. Just because if someone doesn't download it within that month, then they're going to have to write to you again, and then they probably won't. So having a kind of quasi-permanent solution for the storage of pieces that you're going to send to people is a great idea. Don't send a kind of bog standard biography. Nobody really needs to read that. A link to your website is going to be enough as long as there is a bio on your website in case the performer needs to read that for whatever reason. Speaking of your websites, please keep your repertoire lists organized, including information like the instrumentation of each piece very clearly on the first page with all your repertoire is the handiest thing that you can do for performers. If you put something like name of the piece for trio, and then I have to click on the name of the piece in order to find out what the instrumentation of that trio is, that just really creates a barrier when what I want to have is I want to have your whole repertoire list and I want to be able to search clarinet and see how many pieces you have that have clarinet in them. And speaking of instrumentations, when you send that first email, do not include everything you wrote for that person's instrument. Just send one piece. Send me your best clarinet piece. Don't send everything you wrote for the clarinet. If I'm interested in your work after I've seen what you think is your best work, I will go and discover your work through your website. But if you send me a really long email listing everything you wrote for the clarinet, it's just too much, it's too overwhelming, especially when you are cold emailing someone when this is unsolicited. I think how you phrase your introduction is also really important. I think performers often feel like we're just kind of automatons that can reproduce anything that we see on the page. And we often have really specific repertoire interests. In fact, you might have chosen that particular performer because you heard them play one of your teacher's pieces, or you heard them play other repertoire that you really love. Tell them that, because it just builds a personal, individual connection. In fact, do have a really specific reason for contacting that particular performer, because the kind of form email that you send to every clarinet player with your clarinet pieces is almost certainly not going to work. You're probably not going to get any responses to it. And we new music clarinet players, we all know each other and we do talk, so you might just end up being known as that composer. You can be really succinct about this, and it's not about flattering that person. I think that'll be really obvious if you're just trying to flatter them, but you're trying to build a relationship here with a potential future collaborator. You could also invite feedback. I would be really careful how you phrase this, because you don't want to sound like you're insisting on receiving feedback or assuming that you're going to read feedback. It's not our job as freelance performers to do that work for you, but you really want to come in with the most collaborative spirit possible. And I know I've used this word already, but writing something like, "I'd love to work with you," is so much nicer to receive than, "Please play my piece." The project of working together, it needs to be something that serves both of you. Performers can tell when your emails seem overtly self-serving. Even if you've already finished the piece, working with a performer is going to be a collaborative experience, because they're going to bring their own interpretation and their own unique skills with the instrument to working with you. Anyway, that process of learning an interpretation for the performer will also be much improved by having your input. I think it's also a really nice idea to close your email with something that acknowledges how busy that performer might be and how much you appreciate any time they have to answer you. Again, without assuming that they will answer you. I think it's really important to do that, because they probably won't have time. As we said, most of these emails are not going to get a response, but the ones that do, I mean, you just don't know what's going to happen. So I think I do think it's worth doing, but I think it's really important that you treat the person that you're writing an email to as though they're in the room with you. They're a human being with their own interests and their own objectives with their instrument, with their careers, with the kind of music that they want to play. And yeah. Oh, I do want to say one other thing actually before I let you go, which is that having a recommendation can also be a really great way in here. So there's one particular teacher who sends a lot of his students to me when they've got a clarinet piece, and I always love getting emails from one of his students because they're always really polite. I really respect his opinion, so I know that if he thinks one of his students' clarinet pieces is good, I'm probably going to like it. He knows my taste. So that can be a really great way in talking to your teacher about who should I send my work to, who do you think is going to like what I do. You can also talk to other performers who've already worked with you. Do they have friends or colleagues who might also like your work? I've sent my composer friends to other performers plenty of times before. And I think it's a lot more effective, because then that colleague can send me a message and say, "Hey, this guy's just got in touch with me. Do you know him? He says you're friends." And that's just a really nice, probably more effective way to build your network. Let me know if these things work for you. Let me know if you have any questions. I also would like to acknowledge how busy you are, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please do like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye!